So today I'm going to give you a list I put together of the top 10 most gayest video game experiences for Pride Month. Why is it a top 10? Because that's what the YouTube algorithm likes and it's what people are searching. And most lists you'll find out there, if you try to search for LGBT inclusive games, are usually just games that show characters as a romance option. But representation and inclusivity goes a lot more beyond that, into things like how you can represent yourself in the game and the range of people represented by the game itself. So hopefully this list will help you get an idea of some lesser known games, maybe games that you weren't aware of that were more inclusive, as a celebration of Pride Month. Before I do begin though, and just to quickly set the tone a little bit about how this video is going to go, I do want to give a very quick honorable mention to games like Fortnite and Call of Duty, which are games I'm sure people probably weren't expecting to be mentioned in regards to LGBT representation. And the reason I'm including them as honorable mentions is because they are very affirming games. And what I mean by that is, if you just spend like 10 minutes playing either one of those games, some 12-year-old out there is going to call you gay regardless, right? So if you ever need to have your identity affirmed, these are two of the best games to do it. In fact, apparently LGBT people are so good at Call of Duty, there are players asking for them to be removed because they keep losing to people that have pride flags on their banner. If the IDF find out how good you guys are at killing 12-year-olds, they might try and recruit you. But enough about that, let's start off the list with number 10, which is Elden Ring. Well, the reason Elden Ring is on this list is because the character that the story revolves around, Marika, is in fact trans and gender fluid in the most literal sense possible, because the big twist of the game's story, spoiler alert, is that Marika and Radigan are the same person and she can switch between the two at will. So she goes from being male to being female whenever she needs to. In fact, it's one of the key twists in the game's story. So sorry to anyone who if I just spoiled that to you. But there are also characters like Miquella, who also, I believe, poses as Saint Trina by changing their gender as well. So, and let's be honest, Tarnished and Maidenless are both very good gender neutral ways to refer to someone. I mean, I've definitely been using Maidenless to refer to a lot of people recently, and that reason is why Elden Ring is number 10 on this list. But moving on to number 9. Stray Gods is a role-playing musical, as it's called, so it's very similar to a decision-based adventure game, not unlike the kind of games Telltale would make, where you pick dialogue options that dictate what happens in the story. So the story of Stray Gods is about the Greek gods living in New York undercover as regular people, and one of the muses has been murdered, and you play as a character, Grace, who's been accused of murdering a muse, and you need to investigate just what happened. Now the music in Stray Gods is really great.
Let's see how far she bends. We all know how this ends. Hello? Testing 1, 2, testing 3. Is this thing on? Are you testing me with your coterie, ogling expectantly? Heads up, wrecking me won't come for free. See, it won't be easy, Persephone, when I use the moves I bring blessedly. Shadows don't scare me, see, I'll survive it. Maybe you want to do this in private. You're lost, little girl.
And it has an amazing cast of voice actors, including Laura Bailey, Troy Baker, Felicia Day, Ashley Johnson, and the music in-game is fantastic. It's genuinely got some very good songs. And the interesting thing about this game as well is your dialogue options change the type of music your character Grace sings. So there are multiple versions of each song, and you can even choose to change mid-song if you wanted to. For my first playthrough of the game, I personally chose a more sarcastic option because I'm a sarcastic person. But I'll be very honest, if you're willing to take the mean dialogue options, pick the red path, they have some of the best songs in that path. So it does have a good amount of replay value. The art is also fantastic, and you've got a pretty good cast of LGBT characters, which honestly makes the story really interesting and worth following through to the end. But it's a game I've not seen many people talk about, and it's sort of flown under the radar, which is why I wanted to include it on this list, so more people would know about it and maybe give it a go. But I want to move on to my next game now, and that game is Guilty Gear Strive, and by extension a lot of other fighting games as well, like Arc System Works, Blaze Blue, Grand Blue Fantasy Versus. Even games like Tekken and Street Fighter are very inclusive when it comes to representation. I picked Guilty Gear purely because the music is amazing, the art style is fantastic. It's got one of the widest ranges when it comes to LGBT representation, including non-binary characters and trans characters, and it's just a damn good fighting game. I mentioned other games as well previously. La Diva in Grand Blue Fantasy is also trans. Poison from Street Fighter has also long known to be trans. And I believe a new character was added to Tekken named Leo, who I believe is non-binary, but I'm not too sure about that because I don't really play Tekken. But Guilty Gear, and in fact any Arc System fighting game, is a hell of a good time. If you've never played any one of these before, do yourself a favour and check one of them out. But I want to move on to the next game on my list, and that is The Last of Us, both Part 1 and Part 2. Part 2 did lean more into overtly showing characters who are trans and LGBT, whereas Part 1 sort of hinted at it throughout the game, and then you had the Left Behind DLC, which more explicitly stated that Ellie does indeed happen to be on the LGBT theme. The Last of Us TV series actually went more into developing the themes that were only hinted at in the games. But considering how popular this game is and how vocally a lot of conservatives were upset about the representation of this game, I'm sure a lot of people already knew about this one. It gives us a very popular series, let's be frank here. But that doesn't change the fact that it is indeed a good series. The games are both very good. I enjoyed both of them, and I think the representation in both games was great. Moving on to number 6. The next game on this list is Stardew Valley lets you romance a lot of various NPCs that happen to live in Pelican Town, and that does include LGBT romances. In fact, this game feels like an LGBT rite of passage because I don't think I know a single LGBT person that hasn't played this game in my friend group, so I think maybe there's like a secret cabal that when you first come out, they sort of abduct you like the Dark Brotherhood do the initiation trial, but instead of killing 1 of 3 people, you just play Stardew Valley for a few hours. That's just what I imagine the LGBT agenda is. But no, it's a great game, receives a ton of support, still receiving updates regularly actually. If you're looking for a cozy game with some good romance options, it's difficult to recommend anything above this one, to be honest. Well, the next game I'm going to talk about is one of the best when it comes to representation, and if you're a fan of story games, I think you'll love it because the next game on my list is Life is Strange, and also I'm going to include Tell Me Why with it, because even though it's got a different title, it's basically the same type of game. It follows the same formula. It's a story-based game with multiple options to choose from. But the Life is Strange series is honestly one of my favorites actually. It's great for representation across a large spectrum on the LGBT, not just having 1 or 2 gay characters in it. Shows you various characters with different sexualities, and romance is indeed a core part of the narrative. The games all have very good storylines that are really interesting, and if you're a fan of solving mysteries and making impactful dialogue options like in the Telltale Walking Dead series. But I'd argue that Don't Nod actually do it better than Telltale do with their series when it comes to long-term choices that impact your game story. But Don't Nod are a very good developer. I've always been a big fan of their work, and I believe Tell Me Why is actually one of the very first video games that had a trans protagonist. So they have been making history when it comes to representation and pushing the boundaries, and they deserve a lot of respect for that. Some standout games I would recommend would be things like Life is Strange True Colors. They have also remastered the very first game. Either one of those is a very good starting point, and I do recommend checking them out. Now the next game I'm talking about is actually a remake that came out recently, and that game is Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door. That was originally a GameCube game that came out very recently for the Nintendo Switch remastered. It's a very good RPG. It's Mario, of course. In fact, you can include the entire Mario series as well, because Mario has had a lot of representation in the form of characters like Birdo. But the reason I wanted to mention Paper Mario specifically right now is because the character of Vivian, who was originally trans in the original GameCube game, but when translated into English, they removed any references to her being trans. But now that they've remastered the game, they've corrected the translation and made her trans again, and I think that's great in terms of progression actually, because a lot of the time things like representation would be censored when they were translated from Japanese or any other language into English, and it's nice to see that video games are now more inclusive and censoring a lot less when it comes to LGBT themes in stories in video games. So I think that's just a win I wanted to highlight specifically. I think Nintendo does deserve credit for that. Anyway, the next game I want to talk about, in fact it's actually 2 game series I'm including into one, and that is I'm counting both Mass Effect and Dragon Age as one thing for this century. I know it's bending the rules a little bit, but I didn't want to say the same thing twice in a row. And I personally prefer the Mass Effect games. I think the Dragon Age games are a little uneven, whereas Mass Effect is a complete trilogy of 3 really good games and 1 game we just don't talk about. But these classic BioWare games were revolutionary when it came to LGBT romance options, because you just had so many, and they all had very compelling storylines. The Mass Effect Legendary Edition came out only a few years ago, and it's honestly still a great game I would recommend playing. The first one is a little rough around the edges when it comes to the gameplay, because it was their first time making that kind of game, but I think 2 and 3 still hold up, especially 3, which I am a big fan of, because it had some of my absolute favourite moments in the entire series. And you can say the same for Dragon Age as well. In fact, I'd say the writing for characters in Dragon Age was some of the best BioWare's ever done. In fact, Dorian and Ironball carried Dragon Age Inquisition by themselves, in my opinion. So if you're looking for a good action RPG with a great storyline, with hours of content to sink into, and some fantastic options for romance, either one of these is a great bet to go with. But if you want something more, then this next option might be for you. And do you know what? I'm guessing some of you probably call this to be higher up on the list actually. But the next thing on my list is Baldur's Gate 3 is a game I probably don't need to say anything about. In fact, it's probably one of the best representations when it comes to LGBT people in any media out there. I mean, you can have both titties and a dick at the same time and romance anyone you want, because everyone is just like pansexual in that game, which would make sense in a world like Faerun, right? When there is just so much variety of people there. You're practically spoiled for choice. In fact, I don't think there's anything new I can say about Baldur's Gate 3 that you haven't heard already. I think the only thing people are wondering right now is why this is number 2 on my list and not number 1. That's because there is a game that takes LGBT representation up to the absolute highest level possible. I'm sure it's one that a lot of you have already played but probably hadn't considered in regard to this. And that game is The Sims, which is the OG when it comes to LGBT representation in video games, because they have been consistent from the very first game to the very recent one, with allowing you to have romance with any character you want. In fact, the reason I'm putting Sims higher than Baldur's Gate 3 is because you get to decide who is and who isn't gay. You're practically God, and you are the one deciding the sexuality of every Sim in that game. Every Sim you see is one you can make gay, and that's the ultimate gay power you can wield in any video game really, because no other video game today gives you that much control over gender and sexuality as The Sims do, and I'd argue it's held that crown since the very beginning. But that's just been me and my list of games I think are great for celebrating Pride Month, so happy Pride Month everyone. If you have any games that you think I might have missed out on that you want to mention below, please do comment. I'm always down to learn about new games that I might not have played, that people out there love. I appreciate you sticking to the end of my video. If you'd like to also drop a like below, I'd really appreciate it. And I am still working my way up to 1,000 subscribers. If you could hit that subscribe button, I would really appreciate it. And maybe check out some of my other videos. I also stream on this channel. If you want to chat with me directly, feel free to pop by whenever I'm live, and I'll see you in the next one. See you, Nara.